We have been doing this deep dive into what it looks like to neighbor in the way of Jesus, as we do all things here, but specifically neighboring differently than our culture, neighboring differently than maybe our personal tendencies would lead us to. So over the last few weeks, we've been exploring the ways that God calls us to see each other, to slow down and notice one another. In a previous message, we talked about who our neighbor is. So when we say loving our neighbor, it's like, well, who is that? That question has been asked throughout time. And in that particular sermon, we explored the story of the Samaritan who cared for an injured Jewish person. And just to give a little bit of a recap there for anyone who might have missed that or forgotten the story, Jesus clarified who our neighbor is while he was in a conversation with what the Bible has termed like a religious leader or expert. They actually said like expert in the law. And maybe that was said a little tongue-in-cheek. But this leader asked Jesus what he must do to get eternal life. And he's like, so far I've been following the law, of course, as you would expect from me, being an expert and everything. He says, I've been loving God, loving my neighbor as myself. And then he goes, but just to be sure, Jesus, who is my neighbor? And Jesus is like, well, I'm so glad you asked. And Jesus proceeds to dismantle their theology of insiders and outsiders. And in one story, he blows up the definition of the neighbor, which up till that point was somebody I know, somebody I like, somebody Jewish, and it was really narrow. And so in this one story, he increases the standard of the law to the surprise of everyone who is listening. So who is your neighbor? According to Jesus, everyone, even your enemy. So this week, I want to talk about another surprising neighbor. And in Matthew 25, we meet Jesus and the disciples in the middle of a deep dive teaching session. So it's almost Passover weekend, and this is a few days after Jesus had the triumphal entry into Jerusalem where they were heralding him as a future king. It's Palm Sunday, and it's also a few days before his crucifixion. He knows this is coming and nobody else does. And so Jesus is sharing with his disciples what they can expect from what's to come, the age to come, who is going to inherit eternal life. And specifically, he uses a number of different parables and stories to tell who will be inheriting eternal life. And so in the final story, he talks about two types of people, the sheep and the goats. And we have heard this. This is almost like embedded in our cultural vernacular. Maybe we don't always know where it came from, but this idea of the sheep and the goats really got its start here in the story in Matthew 25:31. So he begins to tell them this parable. He says, when the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, he will sit on his glorious throne, and all the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate the people one from another, as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. He will place the sheep on his right and the goats on his left. And then the king will say to those on his right, come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty. You gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you took me in. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you visited me. The righteous will answer him, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and take you in, or naked and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and visit you? And the king will reply, truly, I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers of mine, you did for me. Then he will say to those on his left, depart from me, you who are cursed, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me nothing to eat. I was thirsty, you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger, and you did not take me in. I was naked, you did not clothe me. I was sick and in prison, and you did not visit me. And they too will reply, Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty, or a stranger, or naked, or sick, or in prison, and not minister to you? The king will answer, truly, I tell you, whatever you did not do for one of the least of these, you did not do for me. And they will go away into eternal punishment, but the righteous into eternal life. Now, we actually don't hear the disciples' reaction. It goes straight into their planning for the Passover weekend, But we could imagine that just in the way that the religious leaders were surprised by the story of the Good Samaritan, the disciples are very likely surprised by this story. Now, maybe they had come to accept that Jesus was out there doing good for people who were poor, people who were on the margins of society. Maybe they were could kind of accept that. But what Jesus did once again was he did something audacious by identifying with the poor, with the sick, with the imprisoned. And he says, when you care for them, you're caring for me. Now, the disciples are probably surprised, but they probably shouldn't have been, because the love of the stranger is a recurring theme throughout Scripture. We see in Deuteronomy 10, Moses is commissioning the Israelite people before they enter the promised land, and he's giving them all of the commands. He's telling them what to expect. He's talking about how to access the blessing God wants to give to his covenant people. And he's also talking about what will happen if they don't choose to follow and obey God. And so he says to them, now Israel, what does the Lord your God ask of you but to fear the Lord your God, to walk in obedience to him, to love him, and serve the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, to observe the Lord's commands and decree that I am giving you today for your own good. For the Lord your God is God of gods and Lord of lords, the great God, mighty and awesome, who shows no partiality and accepts no bribes. He defends the cause of the fatherless and the widow, and loves the foreigner residing among you, giving them food and clothing. And you are to love those who are foreigners, for you yourselves were foreigners in Egypt. Fear the Lord your God and serve him. Hold fast to him and take your oaths in his name. He is the one you praise. He is your God who performed for you those great and awesome wonders you saw with your own eyes. And so what God is doing is he's saying, okay, if you want to access this blessing, then you need to obey me. Here's who I am, and here's what kind of God I am. Here's what you can expect from me. And he's saying, obey me, worship me, and the way that you do that is caring for the foreigner. The way that you love and worship me is caring for removing oppression and enacting justice. And so basically he's saying to love God is not just to love God, but also to love all people. The writer of Hebrews underscores this in chapter 13, starting in verse 1. He says, keep on loving one another as brothers and sisters, and do not forget to show hospitality to strangers, for by so doing, some people have shown hospitality to angels without knowing it. Continue to remember those in prison, as if you were together with them in prison, and those who were mistreated, as if you yourselves were suffering. So we see those echoes from Deuteronomy all the way through to Jesus' stories, the message to love the stranger, visit those in prison, care for each other. And so love of the neighbor and love of the stranger was always a part of the commands that God was giving out, even though the Hebrew people often tended to be very isolationist. God was identifying himself as a God of justice who wants to eliminate oppression, who wants to care for people in need. And he is commissioning fellow humans to do that work. He's saying, that's your job, that's on you. So when Jesus arrives, he brings with him a message that our neighbor is not who we thought they were. The Hebrew people had decided okay, we're loving each other, we're caring for each other, and maybe there's foreigners among us, we know them, and so it was kind of this tight-knit group. And so loving our neighbor, really, as we look at the thread throughout history that Jesus comes to reveal, loving our neighbor is going to ask something of us. Because first, our neighbor is probably a stranger, somebody that we don't feel like we have that much in common with. Maybe we're like that person, right? And we hear that in the stories, right? Jesus uses the Samaritan and the Jewish person and their relationship to describe even that person. The person you think is not your neighbor, the person you're sure is not your neighbor, yep, that person is still your neighbor. The other person who's your neighbor is maybe an enemy, someone that you're afraid of, someone you are estranged from. And so we can feel the discomfort rising up in us as we're dealing with this. And so I want to just make a case. Maybe you're like, all right, I get it. This is the annual guilt trip sermon from the outreach team to get us to do good in our community. But there really is an incredibly compelling case that we're given through Scripture, from Deuteronomy, Hebrews, and Jesus' stories. We're commissioned to do this work on behalf of God. And so why do we care for the stranger? Why should we, as Christians, take care of those in need, take care of our neighbor? We care for the stranger because it is how we love and obey God. In Deuteronomy 10, Moses is saying, if you want to obey God, this is how you do it. And so he says you have to love God through obedience, and obedience looks like loving the neighbor, removing oppression, fighting against injustice. And so he says, that's how you love me, is by caring for each other. We love the stranger because eternity is tied to it. As we see in the story of the sheep and the goats, Jesus is not making a complicated algorithm for us. He's not like, well, here you have to jump through all these hoops, you have to sign all this paperwork, you have to be in, you have to be out, you have to pay money. He's making it so clear. He's saying the people who I know, the people who love me, the people who follow me are naturally caring for those in need. They're bringing clothing to people without clothing. They're visiting those in prison. They're taking care of those who are sick. And they're doing it so naturally, they don't even realize that that's what they didn't even know they were serving Jesus. It was just part of how they approached things. It was just something they did without thinking. We care for the stranger because Jesus identifies with the needy. That he's literally saying, when you care for people, when you care for the neighbor, when you care for the stranger, you're caring for me. And so he gives us that, just an incredible motivation that this is no longer somebody who you don't know and therefore are not required to help. We know Jesus. As Christians, Jesus is our brother, he's our friend, and he is a companion throughout our life. And so if, as we're out in the world, we see Jesus reflected back to us in the face of someone who's in poverty, someone who's dealing with drug addiction, somebody who's dealing with a challenging situation, we're automatically seeing the face of Jesus, who we love, who's our friend, who's our brother, reflected back to us, because he said that when you serve them, you serve me. But we also serve the stranger and serve our neighbor because it reveals our shared humanity. Deuteronomy 10:19 reminds us that we can relate to those in need. You are to love those who are foreigners because you yourselves were foreigners in Egypt. We've all been in situations, maybe temporary or for an extended period of time, where we've been the foreigner, we've been the stranger, we've been the person who we needed somebody to come for us, somebody to stand up for us, somebody to advocate for us, somebody to care for us in a more extravagant way. We have been there. And so all the way back in Deuteronomy, he was saying, hey, you guys know what it's like to leave your homeland and to have nothing and to need help. And so with that same sense of empathy, love the people who are foreigners among you now. So it reveals, as we're caring for the stranger, our shared humanity, that we have more in common with people than we think. But the case, I would say, that's a really strong case. Like, we could just wrap up, right? All right, you guys, there you go. There's the case. But I know for me, and for many of the people I've talked to who follow Jesus, or who's simply trying to do good in the world. Some people, maybe you don't follow Jesus, maybe you're trying to figure it out, but you're like, I want to do good. I want to be an agent of kindness and goodness in the world, of course. But sometimes it feels hard, doesn't it? It feels really uncomfortable. When we talk about loving our neighbor, loving the stranger, it's just not really part of our culture or the way that we do things a lot of the time. And it feels very hard to do. Jesus knew what he was doing when he was using these stories to provoke the status quo. And as he did this, little by little, he made himself into an enemy because he was challenging the religious leaders and their very righteousness, right? Like, their whole identity is based around the fact that they are the most righteous. They're the expert in the law. And here Jesus comes and says, yeah, that's not good enough, right? You actually don't know what you think you know. He's like, they're being publicly humiliated. Now, they did it to themselves because they asked the question, but they're walking into a Jesus-style rabbi trap by asking these questions. And he's like, he didn't even offer the story of the Good Samaritan, right? they had to ask, well, he was like, well, who is my neighbor, right? That religious leader. And so we see that because loving our neighbor is so difficult, we're kind of always looking for an out. We're looking for an exception. We're trying to figure out, well, I don't have to serve that person, right? And we're in good company because everyone has always been trying to do this, all right? All of the humans out there have always been trying to figure out, like, okay, that person I get that I would have to help them, but that person, no, right? And we actually had a whole theology of this. The Elizabethan poor laws in the 1600s, this is my social worker coming out, but the Elizabethan poor laws in the 1600s that carried over into, with the colonists in America was like, who is the deserving poor and the undeserving poor, right? And so you had like, well, the widows and orphans, like, that's not their fault. But if it's an orphan who gets in trouble, if it's an orphan who steals, if it's somebody, it was like, oh, nope, undeserving poor, we don't have to help them. And so that has been the way that European charity work was distributed and administered for the last several hundred years. And maybe it was because it already existed, right? You can see that we've been trying to figure out, who do I have to help and who do I not have to help? So God has been making it clear that we need to love strangers, we need to love enemies, and Jesus just isn't backing up this idea of the deserving poor and the undeserving poor. That's just not in there at all. So we don't get to have that language as we're talking about this. If we want to respond to the call of God, if we want to avoid missing the opportunities that God puts in front of us, the people he puts in front of us, if we would say, Lord, I want to be the sheep. I want to not miss you. I don't want to miss you when you're right in front of me, Jesus. Don't let me miss you. We need to get honest about why neighboring is so difficult, why it feels like, hey, if I'm a Christian and this is just me loving Jesus in front of me, shouldn't that be easy? Shouldn't that be like, that's already part of my life? And yet it's not. And yet there's a big barrier for us. And so I wanted to just dive in to this a little bit. And if I'm being honest, maybe these would be my excuses. Like maybe you have different ones that you would add. But these are ones that I've heard from people. These are things that I have myself brought up inside of myself. So this might be like the climactic discomfort moment of the message. And that's okay, because what we're doing with discomfort is realignment, right? If you go to the chiropractor and it hurts a little when they adjust you, it's because you are misaligned. And so we are here to get aligned with who God has called us to be. And there is going to be some discomfort in getting cracked back into place. That's okay, all right? Some of this is going to make you feel, oh, hey, cool, I'm doing pretty good. And some of it, you'll be uncomfortable. So here are some of the reasons that I've seen in my own life for why caring for the stranger is difficult, uncomfortable, or just doesn't feel natural. We tend to overthink the complexity of care that's needed from the person in front of us, while at the same time undervaluing what we do have to offer. So it looks like this. We tell ourselves that the person in front of us has a situation that's too complicated. I don't know where to start. I don't have the homeless shelter phone number in my phone. I don't really know what to do. I would actually probably be more harm than good. And so we end up exaggerating what that person needs in front of us. And we actually, even though most of us do not have the skills or the career to rehabilitate someone or like fully rescue them from a bad situation, we're undervaluing what we do have because we can show up with something small. Even though in most of your life, you are an expert and you can flow into all these situations and you have a solution for things, and we like that, right? In these situations with people who are in poverty, who have need, they don't have very many possessions. And when we're with them, we're suddenly aware that, like, despite this person's poverty, I feel my own poverty. I feel my own lack of awareness, my own inability to fix your problem or meet your need. So that makes us uncomfortable. Another reason that we resist caring for our neighbor is that simply we don't want to be inconvenienced. Like if we see somebody on the side of the road, or whatever, and maybe they're walking, biking, they're pulled over, and it's like, it looks like this thing is happening and maybe I could help them, Maybe they need money or they need a cell phone. But it's like we just kind of keep driving because we have somewhere to be. And you know what? That's not always the wrong thing, okay? But it just becomes our default. We don't even question it, and that's the part where I think we want to look at ourselves honestly about that. Another big reason why we tend to not care for our neighbors is that we simply think that caring for people is a career. We're like, well, I'm not the director of Be Able. I don't work on staff with the homeless shelter or the crisis center. That's not my job. I'll donate to that, organization, or I'll share their posts on social media, or I'll do something like that to help them and back them up. But somebody else is more resourced. Somebody else, that's their job. And we can kind of insulate our consciences because we might say, well, I support that organization that does that work, or my church does mission trips. My church cares for those people in need. And so we can have like goodness or sheepness by affiliation. We can be like, well, I know people who do that work, and so I'm kind of like related to it or connected to it, and we're absolved, right? We like to do that. But when Jesus is separating the sheep from the goats, he's not separating organizations. He's not separating nonprofits. He is looking at individual people. He's looking at how we individually lived our lives. And are we a church that comes together of people who individually are willing to be inconvenienced and see the face of Jesus in front of us as we go through our lives? Another final reason that I think we tend to resist caring for the stranger is that we don't like to face our limitations in our own humanity. I mentioned this earlier, that often we're the expert and we're sort of comfortable being in places where we have answers or we know what to do. And so when we're sitting with someone who has had a significant trauma, who's had loss, who has mental illness, we're sitting maybe with somebody who, has a sign near Walmart, and maybe you have a few extra minutes and you stop to talk to them, and you walk, as you're talking to them, you realize like the depth of loss that this person is dealing with is immense, right? Like, and here they are. They're a fighter. They're still alive. They're still like trying to survive. They've done something like so radical as to have a sign and ask for help, something that most of us are not willing to do. And so as we're sitting there with that person, or we get to know that person's story, we feel like, if you've ever been with somebody who's just had a significant death or loss, just sitting with them, doesn't it feel like you're just staring into an abyss? And maybe you say something dumb or cliche or trite to try to like throw your words to close the gap, and don't you just feel them like vaporizing in front of you because they're not meant to actually solve that. We are sitting in an impossible thing. And when somebody has been through a lot of trauma, a lot of loss, that's an impossible situation that we are sitting and facing together. And you know what? I've said this before, but I'm a therapist, and sometimes one of the jobs that I have as a pastor, as a therapist, is to be with someone in an impossible thing. And I used to hate that so much because I thought that my job was to fix things. I thought my job was to like help someone solve this problem that they have. That's where my value is. That's what makes me worthwhile. That's like why I'm here. And when I was working at the hospital in Fort Riley, or been in these situations where we're dealing with like infant death, or maybe maternal death, or dealing with adoption or abortion, or these mom and baby kinds of things, like life and death stuff, right? Big things. And over, I felt myself staring into the abyss. And I was like, what am I doing? Like, I am just the smallest drop of nothing. And I realized after so many of these scenarios that my job was not to cover over the canyon, it wasn't to fill it with my words or sentiments. It was to simply be present, right? The way in which I could come to be of service was to join this person in the emptiness. That the worst thing that can happen to us when we are going through hardship is that we would be alone in that hardship. And so God has said, you will never be alone. I will never leave you or forsake you. Yes, it will be hard. Yes, there will be trials, but you'll never be alone. And so the service that we give each other, even if I am like, well-to-do and I'm the best in my field in some area. Maybe I'm like some Harvard professor. I might be like the best of the best in my field. But there is inevitably a place where I will come to where I will have nothing to say and nothing to offer. And are we as a church willing to stand there where we don't have anything, where we can't fix it, but would we be willing to come up next to that person and simply stand, simply sit, simply be, because that is the need. The emotion, sorrow, the need that sorrow expresses is a need for comfort. Comfort is offered by presence. That's it. You can relieve yourself of the need to have a solution, to be able to fix it, to say the perfect thing, because it's presence. That's what brings comfort. And you are bringing Jesus with you and meeting Jesus in the face of that person when you're willing to set aside your expertise, your addiction to being the expert. And let me just tell you, I will raise my hand first and say that I have been majorly addicted to being the expert. Okay, I went to school, I went and got my master's because I really, really wanted to walk into a room and be the one that could fix things. I reduced so much anxiety in myself by being able to do that. Like, I attracted all these people with problems so I could externally manage my anxiety, okay? Like, solve. And guess what? That's not what people want. That's not what people need. That's not how it works. That was a hard lesson for me to learn. So when we are feeling that resistance, we might just need to notice, we're going to expect that we feel that resistance. We're going to expect that maybe we don't like to encounter our own limitations in the face of someone else. The fact that we don't want to have to sit when we have nothing really tangible to offer to someone. We don't want to be in that situation. We don't. Okay, so we can accept that and we can say, okay, now what? Now what should I do? We want to embrace the kind of humility and intimacy with struggle that Jesus used to live his whole life. Jesus was willing to be human along with other humans. He was willing to walk into the struggle of their lives and to not, sometimes, he was often doing miracles for people, right? But what was so interesting was that the story of when he went to help Lazarus, the story of when Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead actually starts with Jesus walking very slowly to meet Lazarus. Getting there a few days later, Lazarus has been dead, and Jesus doesn't even run up and bop the tomb or anything like that. He actually sits with everybody first and cries with them. How wild is that? That here he is, 5 minutes from now, he knows Lazarus is going to be walking around, everyone's going to be happy, and yet he's willing to be sad along with. He's willing to grieve. He doesn't rush to fix. He doesn't try to solve it right away. He actually recognizes and honors the sacredness of the grief and loss in front of him. Isn't that incredible? Here's the person who can solve the problem, and he's still in the gap, in the abyss with us. That is incredible. And so the kind of strength that we as a church can develop internally, we can do it. We can do it. We can become those kinds of people. In her autobiography, the social justice advocate and Catholic worker founder, Dorothy Day, said the final word is love. We cannot love God unless we love each other, and to love, we must know each other. We know him in the breaking of bread. We know each other in the breaking of bread, and we are not alone anymore. Heaven is a banquet, and life is a banquet too, even with a crust where there is companionship. We have all known the long loneliness, and we have learned that the only solution is love, and that love comes with community. So how do we neighbor? How do we become the church that individually We are a community of individuals who see the Jesus in front of us and who care for them willingly, who are willing to set aside our expertise and our agenda to do that. I think there's a few attributes of the individuals who are willing to love and live in this way. So I want to share this with you. The first attribute of those who love the stranger is someone who's humble. We choose to be humble and be someone who's willing to associate with, talk to, be seen with, slow down for someone who cannot pay us back. Someone, and when we do this, we're saying, I'm not too far removed from you. It's not that what we have different between us is going to engulf me or be the whole story. I'm going to recognize our shared humanity, our shared, that we're both made in the image of God. People who care for the stranger are accessible, and they choose to be someone who's willing to not be the expert. They don't have to have all the answers, all the social service agency connections necessarily, but they're just someone who identifies with the humanity in the person who's in front of them, no matter who they are. A person who cares for the stranger is willing. They choose to be someone who's willing to simply offer what they have instead of using what they don't have or don't know as an excuse to say, I guess I don't have to do it. The person who serves the neighbor and the stranger is patient. We choose to be someone who's moving at the speed of love, who has decided to move slowly enough to notice people. John Ortberg, in his book, The Life You've Always Wanted, said love and hurry are fundamentally incompatible. Love always takes time, and time is the one thing hurried people don't have. And finally, we love the stranger when we are interruptible, when we choose to be we choose that like someone in front of us is not more important than our own agenda. Not more important than this Jesus-shaped stranger in front of me. And we're willing to offer whatever we have instead of saying, well, I don't know enough, I don't know this person, and coming up with that list of excuses that we often do. And so I want to talk about, just as we're closing here, what this looks like for us to put this into practice. What does this look like for us to live this out? Because maybe there was some of those things on the list from the resistance that you feel. Maybe you've done some of those things. Maybe you're actively doing those things. And it's like, what's the first step here? Like, am I supposed to just walk around like with cash in my pocket and like look for people to give it to? Like, do I have food in my car that I, get gift certificates? Like, what does this look like to actually serve our neighbors? How do I get started? Because it can kind of feel intimidating. Maybe it's like, maybe you feel like, oh, there's such a gap between me and the person that is genuinely living this out naturally day by day. And so again, this is not a guilt trip, right? This is not that. This is simply the realignment. And so first, I would want to invite you to identify how resistance is showing up for you, right? In that list of things that I shared, maybe you struggle with changes to the schedule. Maybe it's like, oh, wait, that's not part of what we're doing today, so that's not going to work, right? It's like very easy to just be like, well, this is our agenda for the day, for the week, and that's what we have to do. And you know what? We've all been a part of situations where the schedule changes and it feels like all heck breaks loose. There's a bunch of chaos, right? And so we do feel like committed to that agenda, but sometimes we need to be willing to be interrupted. Do you hate being in a situation where you're not the expert, where there's a problem and you're like, I don't know what to do? This person is looking at me like kind of desperately and I don't know what to say. I don't know what to do. And I hate that. I hate that feeling so much. I want to run away from that feeling. And so I'll never have to confront it if I never have to see someone who has a need. Maybe that's your form of resistance. Maybe you simply, like if you think about all the people you know, the people you live with, the people you talk to, the people you're around on a regular basis, maybe they're exactly like you. Maybe you're in a little bit of a socioeconomic echo chamber, an ideological echo chamber. Everybody around me is kind of like me. Maybe that is a way that you that you like resist serving people. Maybe you assume when someone's in poverty that they need more than you have. Maybe you look at a person's situation and you're like, I wouldn't know where to start. And then it's over, right? You get to just move on. So those are some ways that we resist loving our neighbor. But God has made it very clear that this is what Christianity looks like. And that actually, it becomes so natural, right? As Jesus is talking with the sheep and the goats, they didn't even realize that it was Jesus. They were just living their lives. That was just how they chose to live. And so I wonder what that would be like if we were to, as a second step here, putting this into practice. What if we asked God to open a door for us? Maybe ask God, hey, give me an opportunity to show love to someone. And then when that opportunity comes, we just have a tiny yes, just starting with like a tiny yes, something very small, something that you're like, I want to turn my heart toward people in need. I want to show the love of God through my own, like just be my willingness to be present, my willingness to not solve something. And honestly, I have been absolutely amazed at the prayer, God, give me an opportunity. Because I've gone through periods of my life where I've been very conscious of people around me, very, very conscious of people who have needs, people with injuries, people with, whatever. I have a long history in this area of like seeing people, all kinds of crazy stories. And I have lots of time in between where those same people that I saw regularly and would try to serve or maybe pray for or help them in some way, I just suddenly didn't see them anymore. It was like something happened, I got discouraged, I got disconnected from people who were doing that work, whatever, and it was like people were visible to me and then people were not visible. Maybe you've been on a missions trip before where all of a sudden you can see all of the need around you and you come home and you feel like, oh, I can kind of see that need. And then for some reason, it sort of wears off, that vision. One of the most effective recalibration prayers I've ever prayed that has been honored every time that I can think is, God, give me an opportunity. Open my eyes to see the person in front of me that you want me to help. And when it happens, you're like, oh, there it is. And it's not like you didn't get to pray the specs around it so that it's like convenient for you. It might not be. And yet, that is exactly what we're being called into. That prayer can be so effective. And so maybe what this tiny yes looks like is being patient when a need arises and the schedule has to change. Maybe you intentionally place yourself in situations where you're not the expert and you just have to be quiet. You have to stand at the abyss of someone's issue. Maybe someone's dealing with grief or loss or something really challenging, and you maybe know that you should reach out to them, and you didn't want to because you didn't want to feel that feeling that you can't solve it. And now you're like, oh, well, they just need me to be there. I can do that. And so now you're going to call, and you're going to be like, hi, can I bring you something? And show up in their life in a way that maybe you wouldn't have before. Maybe if you see someone on this street corner with the sign, you're just driving past, hey, what can I grab you? I'm going to be going through the Chick-fil-A line. What can I get you? Right? It's very simple. You're not trying to solve that person's housing situation or make sure they get on the right meds or like find the at-a-bus stop. Maybe you know that. Maybe you can help them, but you're just meeting that simple need. Maybe you know that you get in the zone, right? Like maybe you work from home, maybe you just get in the zone. You're like, I don't see, like genuinely don't see people at my home all the time. And so maybe what you can do is just put into your schedule a recurring date of service. Like, hey, every second Wednesday, I'm doing this. I am serving with Common Table, which is something we've done as a church in the past. Or maybe I'm, doing some organizing the closet at the emergency shelter once a month, or I'm making food for somebody, or I'm doing something that just on the calendar, I'm automating it because maybe you're a schedule person and that works for you, right? But you're building that love of neighbor into your schedule. Those are just tiny ways that we can begin to say yes and see each other. So again, this is not that guilt trip, right? This is the uncomfortable realignment that God is placing in your soul, and each one of us has a different kind of realignment God's calling us to. Some of you are already living in this way, and I know who you are. Even as I look out in front, I can see your faces, and I know who you are, the people who love in this absurd, extravagant way, and who are constantly looking out for the needs of others because they just seriously can't help themselves. These people are incredible. They are saints, and you know them in this community here. And if you need more of this, hang out with that person, because that person, those people, a couple people that come to mind right now, that I'm not even going to say your name because rewards in heaven, guys. I don't even want to steal that from you. But those people that you know that are here that love like this, hang out with them. Because just get in their space, because you're going to end up loving, caring for someone, because that's what they do. That's what they do in their orbits. So, again, putting this into practice, identify how resistance shows up for you. Just be like, okay, I'm acknowledging that, I'm naming that, and then ask God to open a door and commit to that tiny yes. Not a grand yes, a tiny yes. Get yourself in the room. So this, in closing, is an invitation to do the most natural thing Christians can do and respond to the call to become people that we're designed to be, the people who love God, love others from an overflow of our love for God. So I want to bring up the worship team.